On the 19th of October 1330, at dusk, 24 men gathered in the centre of Nottingham. They were mostly in their 20s, and all on horseback, ready to ride out of the town. But unlike merchants or pilgrims assembling to set out together, these men were silent and unsmiling. Beneath their riding cloaks, they were all heavily armed. The reason for their gathering lay within the fortress which overlooked the town. Somewhere within those walls, high on the massive outcrop, was Roger Mortimer, the Earl of March, who kept the young king, Edward III, within his power and ruled in his place. Several of the riders had already been summoned that day to see the brooding dictator. He had questioned each of them in turn, all but one had refused to speak. The only man who had dared to answer back was their leader, Sir William Montague. He had replied evasively that he would give a short answer to anyone who accused him of being part of a plot inconsistent with his duty. Mortimer had let him go, but not with good humour. Now Montague was waiting. He knew it would only be a short time before Mortimer would arrest him and his friends. Mortimer had already given the order that the guards were to ignore the king's commands and only to obey his own. How suddenly political fortunes changed. It was just 4 years since Edward II had been swept from power by Mortimer and Queen Isabella, his mistress. It was only 7 months since the Earl of Kent, the king's uncle, had been beheaded on Mortimer's orders. Shortly after that, the young heir to the earldom of Arundel, Richard FitzAlan, had been arrested before he could carry out his plan to seize Mortimer. Montague had no wish to suffer the same fate, nor did he wish to see the young king set aside. He had spent most of the last 12 years at court and had seen Edward III grow up. But that was how serious matters had become. The future of the English monarchy was at stake. Somewhere in that castle above, young Edward was in fear of his life. Montague believed Mortimer was plotting his murder and the seizure of the throne. "It is better to eat the dog than be eaten by the dog," Montague had remarked quietly to the king after being dismissed from Mortimer's presence. But as Montague knew, it was one thing to suggest eating the dog and quite another to do it. Mortimer had spies everywhere. Although John Wyard had been the king's trusted friend for several years, it emerged that he was an informer. It had been Wyard who had told Mortimer of Montague's plot. Mortimer had been thrown into a fury, like a devil for wrath, and now he was on the defensive, perhaps about to order all their deaths. Already he had mustered troops throughout the kingdom, ready to defend his position. He was, after all, a soldier, one of the very few successful war commanders of the last 20 years. He was a clever manipulator and an arch propagandist,